We have come to the end of the year. A lot has happened in 2025, from great games coming out to not so great games, lots of highs and lows, and every year my bones get more brittle and my back aches just a bit more with every calendar year. But if there's one thing I've been right about since starting my godforsaken YouTube journey on this platform, is that I'm a really big advocate that nobody likes being pandered to. I don't care what color you are, what's between your legs, or what thoughts you got in that brain of yours, the idea of pandering because you think it'll make you money or catch you some goodwill is just lobotomized slave behavior, in my opinion. There's nothing good about it ever. And in case you haven't noticed, after a certain guy won an election, a lot of that stuff has been getting gutted like a fish across everything too, but there's a lot that inspired this video today, so take my hand and let's get into it. First, from PC Gamer, they did a year in review for different companies. Specifically, I want to focus on the Microsoft one because it's pretty bad. This article was aptly named Microsoft's Year of Shame, which, yeah, that's a pretty good title for Microsoft and Xbox's performance and overall reach this year, I gotta say. Xbox is not doing well, everybody knows it. They tried to force Nintendo prices on their games, everybody laughed in their faces, and then they swapped back to $70 USD and people still didn't buy their games because a lot of them are just not good at all. Xbox has been a dead man walking for a really long time, but it was this part of their article of shame on Xbox that inspired this video in the first place as seen here, where PC Gamer blasts Microsoft for canceling, running away, and basically pretending that their DEI efforts at the company never existed in the first place, which angered PC Gamer greatly. Because DEI is the god of gaming journalists and many a game developer in the West still, they worship this concept like it's the source of their own oxygen. In case you don't know, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Basically corporate slop words that mean we gotta hire people based on skin color or their political beliefs over, who's best for the job. This has been disastrous for every single facet of any company in the existence of everything. But for video games, it's led to billions being lost, and it's all because these companies mass hired a bunch of people who have no business being in games in the first place. And then the lobotomized slop came out of the pipes and dumped onto our plates looking like wet cement, and then these companies had the audacity to call us words because we didn't want to eat the microplastic garbage that they were spewing. Studios would close down, games would pass away, and Batman at one point got shot in the face on a parking bench by Harley Quinn due to all of this too. So yes, if you ask me, it's really no wonder why so many companies have decided to not suddenly care about DEI. PC Gamer though was mad about it, as TheVerge.com. Here's that Verge article, by the way, that PC Gamer was referencing in the first place. These people have got their panties in a torsion because nobody wants to live in collective delusion with them anymore. As seen here from The Verge's article, they're really not happy that Microsoft has decided to up and just quietly forget about diversity completely pretty much after that guy again won that election in 2024. Of course, Microsoft isn't better yet despite dropping DEI. Mostly because these things take time to, actualize. But to be real with you, Microsoft hasn't made much of anything I would even consider buying at full price these days at all either way for a really long time. I actually think the only thing I bought from Microsoft this year was probably the Gears Reloaded remaster, but that game is about as far from DEI as you can get pretty much. You ain't gonna find me paying real money for South of Midnight or whatever other game that just exists so Microsoft can throw it on like a spreadsheet and some PowerPoint to tell other people that are out of touch in like suits how virtuous and inclusive we are. Very cool. Are these games making you money like the good old Halo days? Oh, they're not. Then why are we doing this? Remind me. It's moronic. But you've probably seen in this video already a lot of Asian games being used as footage, and that is not by accident. Because you see, this leads me into the other story that directly challenges what's going on with Microsoft and more when it comes to them finally being forced to tell the truth for once and admit that they were stupid all along. Don't worry, we'll get back to Microsoft and more, but this is equally or actually even more important. So, the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion? It's a cult classic. People love that anime a lot. It's got crazy women in different looking ways, and their brains are nuts, and there's a lot of sci-fi in it. I won't spoil it for you, obviously, but anyways, here's the guy who directed it, and his name is Hideaki Anno. He's an old Japanese guy that is frankly pretty based, if I do do say so myself. Because this leads me into one of those sorts of people who is forcing that industry at large, both in the West and in Japan, that the best way to make content actually is to completely ignore the well wishes and belief systems of the West entirely. This comes from automaton.com and it's titled Neon Genesis Evangelion director Hidetaki Anno doesn't believe creating for the global market is the way to go. I'm sorry, but the audience will have to be the one to adapt. Oh, what a line there. The audience will have to adapt. You'll love to see that, but what a beautiful way to put it too. But he's also right, and the failure of Microsoft's DEI policies and more tie directly into what Hideaki says further into this article too. And he's right to say so, since it's currently tracking that the Japanese content industry, that's games, anime, manga, all of it, is apparently set to make somewhere near 20 trillion yen per year by 2030. That's like $128 billion in American money. Yeah, that's a lot of teriyaki chicken you can buy for that amount of money, but for good reason, because at this point, Japan's biggest export is straight up, let's be real, just anime, manga, and video games pretty much, and it's true, and that's awesome. People just can't seem to get enough of Japanese anime and video games. These things sell like cold water in a desert at pretty much all times of the year. People in the West are paying through the nose for volumes of manga, even getting tattoos of these things on their bodies. Have you looked up how much the whole Berserk series costs right now on Amazon? It's a lot of money. And how many people have you also seen that have the brand of sacrifice from Berserk on their bodies as a tattoo? I guarantee you that someone watching this right now probably has that tattoo themselves, but look, the point is that what Hideaki Anno says is not only scathingly based, but absolutely true as well. This guy has been alive longer than most of us, and he knows that the best way to market your anime, or really any product at all, is to do the exact opposite of whatever the West is doing currently. They'll always say we're making things for a modern audience, which is usually just corporate slop talk for we're making stuff for weirdos that like to eat lab-grown meat and bugs while living in their pods. No thanks, I'm good. I don't want to buy or eat what you're selling because it sounds like communist gobbledygook if I'm being honest. This is largely why for the most part I usually play only Asian games. Not always, but usually. And when I do play, Western stuff I guess, it's mostly not really even being made in places like Canada or America to say the least. Because places like California, for example, is so ripe with mind virus nonsense everything that they just make is just terrible these days. It's not to say that Americans make bad content, that's not true, but it is true that the stuff primarily that is being pushed from within America by these corporations, it tends to be things made by these pod people who think that open borders are a good idea, that voter ID shouldn't exist to name a few. You know what kind of people I'm talking about. Don't lie to yourself. You know exactly who I'm talking about. Anyway, Hideaki flat out confirms that he never makes anything with the global audience in mind because he thinks that's really stupid. Here's what he said in that interview. I personally never made anything with the overseas audience in mind. I can only make domestic stuff. Production companies are quick to say, think about the overseas market, but personally, that's not my goal. He continues. My stance is simply, it first needs to be a work that will be well received and found interesting in Japan. But if by any chance people overseas also found it interesting, I'd be grateful for that. Anno mentions that working on Evangelion 3.0, 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time, he wasn't considering the overseas market at all. And as he should be, because let's be real, if people wanted content that resembled stuff in the West, they wouldn't be buying or watching things that were being made in the East. Duh, I know, real revelation there, but no, seriously, that's something you have to point out because you probably also noticed, a lot of people out here feel as though their brains got lobotomized in the middle of the night by goblins or something, but they also are just not aware of what they do or say. Does that make any sense? A lot of people in the West, they're kind of stupid, but they're also unaware that they're stupid. It's like zombies, but dumber. The point is that making content for a global audience has always been a bad idea, because that's when you fall into the realm of a game made for everyone, but not really made for no one territory. Like when some games try to be everything at once instead of just being amazing at one or two things. That's a lot of Western media to a T. We need a story that's global. We need an open world, but we need surface level RPG mechanics, but we also need conversation with choices that don't really matter. But we also need forced diversity, and we need strong female characters, and we need them empowered too, and the men can't be too strong or they'll overshadow the female women characters. And we need to talk down to our audiences and throw in some gender progressive nonsense. Now tell me which Western game or show or movie did I just explain? Everyone! Oh, a lot of them. Yeah, that's kind of the problem, isn't it? You could probably say, well, he just described the Horizon series. No, wait, I think that's Ghost of Yotei. Telltale maybe? Was it Spider-Man 2, Miles Morales? Did he just explain Dragon Age the Veilguard? Maybe it was Dustborn. It's all of them, guys. It's all of them. It just never ends, despite it making nothing but ruining everything instead. How many times does Batman need to get shot in the face on a park bench before people realize this way is stupid and doesn't work? Let's look at the Demon Slayer movies. As Collider reported back in November 2025 here, Demon Slayer, as a movie franchise, has already surpassed $1 billion at the box office. The newest film in that franchise was Infinity Castle. And how much did that make at the box office worldwide? Around $729 million and then some alone. Demon Slayer made more money at the global box office than Superman, Fantastic Four, Captain America, and whatever else, I guess. I think really only stuff like Zootopia and that Jurassic World movie did better pretty much, which is telling something because, well, people like dinosaurs and I guess a lot of people are furries on the inside. I don't know. You know what kind of people I'm talking about. But how did Demon Slayer make so much money? It's just a cartoon, they say, clutching their pearls. But the existence, as well as the performance of Demon Slayer, is exactly what Hideaki Anno is talking about here. Do you think that Demon Slayer's movie was made for a global audience, the modern audience? I mean, the only thing global about it is that it has dubs depending on where it was released. And it has, you know, it's playable, I guess, in movie theaters worldwide. I guess that's global. But as its core audience and all of that, Demon Slayer is a Japanese-made product with Japanese-inspired characters and imagery. The show is literally, I guess the manga too, is about a guy fighting Japanese demons. It's in the title, so this proves this again and again. Anime obviously is curb-stomping everything. Remember when it was uncool to like anime in junior high? I remember. What do you mean you watched a show where a boy fell from space in an orange suit that turns his hair yellow at times? Now kids these days, they worship anime like it's their god. But this is what happens when the disastrous wave of DEI slop has done what it has done for so long. Like, be honest with yourselves. What new franchise exists that young people genuinely love and resonate that was made in a Western sense? I think the only one I can think of is K-pop Demon Hunters, right? That was technically made in America by Sony Pictures Animation, which is technically a Japanese company. Although you could argue the entire premise of K-pop Demon Hunters is very obviously cemented in South Korean culture and music, as if the name or the music didn't give that away already. So sure, K-pop Demon Hunters was made as in the animated, I guess, in the West, but the directors of the picture were Koreans. The music is literally K-pop, obviously. The people who wrote the songs and performed them were South Korean performers and artists too, so basically everything K-pop Demon Hunters exists because of, again, making that content like Hideaki Anno has been saying this whole time, not for a global audience per se, but for wherever that content is technically pulling from. Demon Slayer is Japanese, K-pop Demon Hunters is Korean, and this random Chinese woman I found on Google is Chinese. But regardless, the point is that everything that is good derives itself from its homogenous culture in some way. And the reality is, for the past 10 years, the West has, I gotta be honest with you guys, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, the West has no real culture anymore. There is no cultural identity of what the West personifies anymore. Like, for example, right? If there's one country in Europe that has been killing it with game releases lately, it's Poland. Can we admit that? You got The Witcher 3, I guess 4 coming, Cyberpunk and its sequel over there with CD Projekt Red. You got Lords of the Fallen 1 and 2 from CI Games, and you got stuff like Chronos the New Dawn, which is also made in Poland as well. Now, why do every one of those games I mentioned do well with people as well across the world? Because at their core, their identity and their way of doing things are directly tied to the way of Polish life, of European life homogenously, I mean. The same way Hideaki Anno is Japanese and directed Evangelion or Demon Slayer Judo slapped the box office. These Polish games are blowing up and making millions because that sort of content, how it's made, conveyed, and personified, can really only be found clearly in Poland. Look at what just won Game of the Year, right? Expedition 33. Gee, I wonder where their inspiration and themes came from as well. Probably has something to do with the giant Eiffel Tower and the use of French language and literary works they directly pulled from in that game too. You wouldn't be getting Expedition 33 from the West, as in say Canada or America. It could only be made by people who lived and are influenced and fluent in that specific culture that they derived it from. Look at Chinese games right now, like Where Winds Meet, a game set in Wuxia, literally China by Chinese developers. This is what I'm saying, okay? All these cool and unique games being made by people because they're directly inspired by the physical world and teachings around them. Even From Software with Elden Ring and all of that, sure it has Western influences to some degree, but at their core, they're Japanese games made by Japanese people. This is why a lot of stuff made in the West lately is just nothing, because the culture is really cooked. The West culture, for the most part, is just people looking to other parts of the world for inspiration. Otherwise, why is anime and such so widely accepted? Probably because these people in the West are just starved for actual unique things to have. Let's be real, the culture of the West for the past maybe 10 years has just been DI slop unending forever. This is why nothing gets said or made in an interesting sense to the same degree as other places anymore. Sure, you do have American culture to a degree, gun-toting yeehaw, let's wave the flag Americans, but the truth is that a lot of game developers, they openly hate that sort of culture, so they don't show it. And I just want to be clear, okay? I do think American culture is American for a reason. But again, unfortunately, a large amount of game developers, they seem to hate that culture that they were born in, if that makes sense to you. Which is why all they tried to make games and movies and then some for years about this new culture, I guess, is because they wanted to push it, to make that the new American culture. The DEI things, I mean. This is why objectively Western games were better in the early 2000s to early 2010s, because at that point, American culture was still unique. It was openly embraced, and it was influencing many games and movies that got made, and the media didn't hate America like they do now. Call of Duty, even stuff made in Canada like Mass Effect or Battlefield, they had major inspiration from how the Americans did and conveyed things during that time. This is undeniable. But once the annoying DEI slop culture took over, there was nothing to pull from anymore when making things. And this led objectively to terrible products, which is why Microsoft and many others have quietly started to walk away from it because it didn't work. But this doesn't just magically fix things, because if the culture is not fed and kept healthy, the things being made will only be doomed to repeat the same mistakes in the future. This is why Japanese culture and Chinese and Korean made things, whether it's anime, video games, or K-pop music, has such a stranglehold on the West. Because all of those things and more are influenced, inspired, and created due to the culture, mythology, and belief systems of where those things were originally made. This is why a lot of comic books can rival Demon Slayer, One Piece, and then some in terms of like sales and just love and popularity, just to name a few. It's because the culture of the West has become so diluted and disjointed and frankly nothingness pretty much, that there is objectively not much to pull from in a similar degree. If they do pull from Western influences, they pull from like medieval times. That's not modern day, because back then, European and Western culture had an identity, but these days, not really much at all. I had this discussion with my girlfriend a bit back on what is even Canadian culture anymore? That's where I live, by the way. And I told her besides the basic stuff like we like maple syrup or I guess play hockey, generally speaking, the actual modern Canadian experience is not what it used to be or is anymore. It's become largely a foreign concept, which is why most Canadians fly abroad to experience other cultures. Because what's here in Canada is a nothing culture. It's a mess. So it's not surprising that everybody wants some of that anime slice of the pie, or why K-pop Demon Hunters is one of the most listened to or watched movie these days. Of course it is, because it has actual culture. It has real substance to it. The American mythology, whether you want to admit it or not, is probably comic book movies, and before that, Western stuff like cowboys. But even the comic book stuff isn't working these days because it's no longer being inspired by what made America great in the first place. It's instead inspired by globalist slop ideals, and it shows because everything sucks now pretty much. Hideaki Anno continues where he then says this: works that are made through a Japanese thought process can only be understood in Japanese. Film has both visual and sound elements, so compared to other forms of storytelling, the language barrier is not that. However, lines in the script are still in Japanese, and the drama is achieved through the thoughts and feelings the characters experience in Japanese. Automaton Hideaki Anno continues, the Evangelion director remarks that such works can be well received overseas as well, given that the audience understands the intentions and nuances of the narrative expressed in Japanese. However, he also says that as a creator, he can't accommodate his work to the audience. I'm sorry, but the audience will have to be the one to adapt, he added. And he's right, by the way, because to make content for a global audience is to make content that has no identity by definition. Let's circle back to Canadian culture for a second, okay? Since obviously, like I said, I was born in Canada. What really is Canadian culture, truly? I guess it would be the natives that lived here first, right? But most people would say stuff like maple syrup again, or hockey, or drinking Tim Hortons, I guess. But these are not Canadian culture things. This is like Japan saying rice is Japanese culture. But it isn't, because rice is also found in places like China, Korea, Malaysia, etc., right too. You can't even really say that hockey is Canadian culture because many countries around the world also play hockey, and Tim Hortons, that isn't even a Canadian company anymore, and the food there has dropped in quality like crazy. I can't even go to Tim Hortons anymore because the quality of everything there is so bad. I just can't go there now myself. So by definition, there really isn't no culture per se in Canada anymore. The Canadian culture is just a mutation of other cultures that have come to live here instead from other parts of the world. Like someone can say, I was born in Canada, but I'm Korean or something. So they probably eat Korean food, practice Korean beliefs, right? For example, I'm Serbian Armenian. I was raised primarily as a Serbian. I went to Christian Orthodox church. I drank rakia at Christmas. I ate sarma at Christmas too. I ate stuff like burek, for example. We broke the bread with the coin in it. We cracked our eggs against each other to see whose was stronger on Easter Day. We celebrated Christmas on January 7th based on our own calendar year. But everything that I just said and did growing up, by definition, let's be real, that's not Canadian culture, is it? It's Serbian culture. And that's the point. There is no Canadian culture, especially these days. It's instead smaller, enclosed communities of people from various parts of the world that just happen to live amongst one another within Canada. Even when Canadians do Canadian award shows, people still identify their music, their art, whatever it is, as something adjacent Canadian, right? As a Serbian Canadian, as a Japanese Canadian, as an Indian Canadian, but not Canadian. And that's why when it comes to games or art or anything else, nothing is necessarily Canadian anymore. It's Canadian adjacent at best. And American culture for the past 10 years anyways has been a lot like that too. It can't be too American, or the communist game developers who run their award shows will cry about it and hold their pearls and say it's too conservative or hate-filled or something else, as we all know. So instead, American culture is watered down because crazy people are in positions of power, the same way in Canada too. This is why what Hideaki Anno says about making content for your people first is why it always works. Because ultimately Japan is Japanese, because Japanese people live in Japan, speaking Japanese, living with their customs and ways that go back hundreds if not thousands of years, eating their food and customs with their people in a homogenized society for the most part. So when content gets made there, it is not as an Asian-born Japanese person. No, it is Japanese because it is Japanese. So when Demon Slayer makes $700+ million globally, it's not because people want to watch it because it's Canadian or American adjacent. No, they're watching it because it's Japanese centric. Even stuff like Pokemon, arguably the games were better when even their fictional worlds like Kanto were based on real Japanese places and traditions. The games have only gotten worse the more global their perspectives have become. Pokemon Legends ZA is set in Lumio City, which is supposed to be Paris, apparently. But really, besides the Eiffel Tower and like people drinking coffee outside, I guess, like what is French about this game? Like nothing really at all. But if you go back to Pokemon Red, Blue, Green, Silver, Gold, Crystal, those games distinctly feel like Japanese-made games, where your Pokemon trainer is moving through a world that is directly inspired by where these game developers have lived themselves. Because they have lived there. They experienced it every day of their lives. It is by definition a Japanese game because it harkens to their roots. Even go look at the Persona games to prove this too. You're literally a student in Japanese high school, for crying out loud. A completely different way of doing things both aesthetically and socially than American school. Can we all agree on that too? Even the Yakuza or Like a Dragon games, again, why do people like them? Oh, I don't know, maybe because it's set in Japanese culture. This is why places like Microsoft have been forced to tell the truth, because at their heart, they have no culture. They have no identity, and that is why Western culture fails more often than it doesn't. Even when places like Sucker Punch make games that do well, like Ghost of Tsushima, it's American-born people making a game that is outside of their own culture because they know that their own culture, as in where they live, is nowhere near as interesting as that outside of their own. This is why things are the way that they are, okay? It's because we have a lack of real identity in the Western world, and people who are being raised in secular communities, whether they're from or not interested in Western society identity, because there is nothing there to pull from anymore. If there was, their movies would be better, their games would sell better, and their influence would be far more important. But when the things doing the best consistently are foreign-made, foreign-born, and influenced, this proves that these people and companies are going to have to admit the truth, that they have lost the culture war, so to speak, because ultimately they have no culture themselves to pull from anymore. And it is a sad realization to come to, but it is what it is. Things could change, but at this point, the scales are so heavily skewed in the direction of people wanting to consume anything not Western-made. It's going to take a few miracles at best, or at least to even the pace again. I guess to end this video, let me just say this. Even when an Asian person is raised in, say, Canada or America, are they not raised by their parents in a community likely with ties to Asian influences and where they came from? Eating Asian food, surrounded by other Asian people, speaking their own native languages even. Like I said, there is no Western culture anymore in a first world sense, really. At least when it comes to America somewhat, and especially to Canada, which has none at all in my opinion. This is why content that does well is no longer made with those influences, okay? And the people who have no culture, no community, the ones who are left alone in a sense, are easily swallowed up and brainwashed by the nonsense their teachers and then some push on them, whether it's to believe that there's multiple genders or whatnot even. Gee, I wonder why that hasn't run rampant in, say, Japanese or Chinese circles even in the West. It's because when nations are not homogenous in their customs, it's easier to control them. That's just the truth, and you can't really deny it. And it also reflects on the content that is made within these places too. It's why the next Demon Slayer or One Piece or Naruto is never never going to come from Canada or America. It will always come from the well of influence that is Japan for a reason. I'll let Hideaki Anno say what he said here. Let me read it for you. Compared to video games, which are interactive media, film is a one-way road, Anno explains. Even if the audience complains, that doesn't necessarily mean that the complaints are reaching the creators. Film isn't a medium that accommodates its contents for the viewer. That's why the audience has to trust the creators in what is interesting. And that's why I think it's completely fine to keep production domestic, he says. Even Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki stick to domestic production. And I'm sure that they don't even think about the overseas market. So case in point, the consumption of content that is outside of the West will continue at the rates that it will until these places drown themselves in the cultures of their own people again. Why do you think that Poland, like I said, has so many games coming out that feel distinctly Polish in a way? And why do you think at the same time that the hub for these sorts of games is also one of the only countries in Europe that is also against mass migration too? Gee, I wonder why their games have Polish influences the way that they still do. Maybe it's something to think about, don't you think? This is why the Western game industry is so cooked. You got a bunch of people with conflicting ideas worried that they're going to step on someone else's toes and insult them or offend them or whatever and get called something if they do anything that remotely resembles where they originally came from. So instead, you're going to get slop that has no meaning, no identity, just pure gray goop sharded out like expired ketchup, because that's all that can be made by people who are afraid to tap into who they really are at the end of the day. And that's why games that are made in places by people that are homogenous always do better. And that to me is the worst part of this all, is that the West is losing because it's being held down by these, let's be honest, coward ideologies, while the rest of the world is free to flourish in media and expression because they're not attacked for it, I guess. But what can you expect when the good people do nothing? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And if you don't believe me, just look at Dragon Age Veilguard. That is something that could only exist and be made by Western hands because it means nothing and nobody will remember it for anything else than being a cautionary tale, while the Demon Slayers and Narutos will live on forever and ever. And if you ask me, that's a real shame, but I honestly just never see that changing anytime soon. But I've talked enough. Let me know what you think. Have a nice day.